I'm Scott Allen Miller. It is the 9th of November, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in León, Nicaragua. Today is my last day that I really have enough time to get all the technology and stuff done so that I'm ready to go on my trip coming up on this weekend. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm going to be taking with me and what I'm packing. We're going to be answering some viewer questions and just general stuff about Nicaragua here on our home stretch before traveling to South America for the next 2 weeks. So stick around for After the Bump for a little bit of Nicaragua content, and be sure to like and subscribe so you can follow along as we head to Costa Rica, on to Peru, and then ultimately the destination of Bolivia, where I'm going to be spending the next 12 days. I'll see you all after the bump. For normal people, when you're doing international travel, the things that you worry about are mostly like packing and making sure you have enough underwear. But when you're a vlogger and you work remotely as a digital nomad, and especially when you're traveling for work, this is not a vacation coming up for me, traveling means a whole lot of work in wrapping up projects that are in the office that may benefit from me physically being in the office, and a whole lot of getting technology ready so that it can travel with me and making sure that I have all of the right pieces and parts and batteries are charged and connectors are available and I have all the things I need, because once I go. It's not like you can run out and grab a lot of replacement stuff very easily. So in this particular trip, from a vlogging perspective, the only thing I'm taking with me is the camera I'm talking on right now, which is the GoPro Hero 11. This is my middle camera. I have the 12, I also have the 9. The 12 is great. I prefer on trips like this, when I don't particularly need its features, not to take the latest and greatest camera with me when there's no reason, and I don't want to take the 9 because it's old and flaky at this point. Like, it's just burning out, it is. But it still does a good job when I'm able to use it, so I just use it under controlled circumstances. For this, the 11 is just the way to go. It's the least valuable if I were to lose it or something was to happen to it, but it's really, really good as far as what it's able to do, so I should be able to get amazing content for you guys. Normally, each of my GoPros has its own SD card. This time, I'm taking a full spare, so I have a ½ terabyte of SD cards just for the GoPro, and I'll have my iPhone 13 with me as well, which brings me to, I had to spend a lot of time, maybe 3 or 4 hours today, simply clearing off stuff from my iPhone. That's a weird problem, but something that vloggers really have to think about. If you're doing content creation and you're doing stuff on the go, you really need your phone to be available. And for most people, you let your phone just fill up with photos and videos, and people tend to just keep it full all the time. And the amount you can record is pretty limited, but I need to be able to record hours at a time potentially. And so having absolutely every video offloaded from it, uploaded somewhere, backed up somewhere, all that has to be done. And so anytime I'm about to travel, my last minute thing is getting absolutely everything off of my phone so that I have the most capacity for whatever we're going to do on the road, because who knows what's going to happen on the road. And the capacity of your phone is so big that, yeah, I could offload it all to my laptop, but then my laptop's full. Sure, I could back it up to the cloud, but there's every possibility that on this trip, I'm never going to have really good internet that's good enough to allow me to send RAW files anywhere. So normally I work through a process of having my GoPro automatically upload to the cloud, clean itself off. I have like this really good workflow, but it takes more time and it uses a lot of networking. Well, I probably can't do that in a lot of circumstances. For example, on Saturday night, I'm going to be at the Hampton airport in San Jose. Well, Hilton doesn't allow GoPros to connect to their wireless network. You can connect your laptop and your phone generally, and their networks are generally kind of slow, but they'll do the job if you absolutely need them to. But as a content creator, even uploading one video is often very difficult, and getting the GoPro to upload is impossible because you have to go into a web browser and do all kinds of weird things. So because of that, I have to have a way to take my GoPro and offload it to the computer, and then the computer can attempt to upload those files over time. It's all very difficult when you have a good workflow with good Wi-Fi under normal circumstances. These are things that normal people don't have to think about at all, but for content creators, it is a huge problem when you don't have just solid Wi-Fi the way that you expect. Now, I'm hoping when I'm in Bolivia, I'm going to be in Airbnbs. Hopefully they have good Wi-Fi with just normal Wi-Fi access points, and I'm able to work and I'm not sharing it with 100 other people, and I don't have to go through some weird gateway to get my devices to connect, and maybe my GoPros will just work normally. That'll be fantastic and make my life really easy. Then I can just hook them up and let them go all night long every night, and in the morning have them be clear and backed up and charged, and life will be easy. But we're going to have to see how that actually plays out. There's just always a lot of unknowns when you travel. So part of everything is just being so prepared. So I'm taking my MacBook M2 Air which is my first major travel with it. I've had it for quite some time, and I use it all the time, but this is the first time I'm really pushing it in a travel scenario. I'm taking a 2 terabyte external hard drive so I can offload everything that I'm not actively working on very quickly and not have that laptop fill up, even though it does have a terabyte drive. So I have 3 terabytes of total storage on the laptop plus half a terabyte on the GoPro, plus my phone, whatever little bit it can hold. And we already have a bunch of videos done. So we've been really, really diligent about that as far as getting as much done as possible ahead of time. So the only things I have left to do is this update for today, the 10th for tomorrow, which is happening in real time. And then I already pre-recorded, I know this kind of sucks, I don't normally do this, the 11th and the 12th, which is the weekend days that I'm traveling. So you have information about my travels as they're supposed to be happening, that you'll have shows with content. That way I'm not scrambling and you guys don't have to worry about not getting content. That way I'm able to record what's happening, save it, and actually compile it into a good video once I'm in a place where I'm able to use the laptop. So hopefully I'll be able to keep up without too much of a problem at all. And I've really put a lot of effort into making sure this is a smooth vlogging transition, but it's the first time, believe it or not, that we're actually testing it like this. In the past, when I've traveled, it was always before I was a serious vlogger. Since I've been a serious vlogger, I've been based here in Nicaragua, and while we've done some travel, it's always to family in the United States. It's not going where I'm stuck in hotels for extended periods of time where I don't know what my technology and don't know what my internet and whatever, and my schedule is not my own. So I don't have that knowledge of what it's going to be. So this is a new level of challenge for me doing a daily vlog. People who do travel vlogging never do daily vlogs. This is absolutely mind-boggling when I stop and think about it. And I'm like, how do other people do this? Oh, wait, nobody does this. So we're going to see how this works out. And on this particular trip, I'm going alone, which makes it much harder. If I had someone else handling a bunch of logistics, getting into hotels, dealing with, just tickets or whatever, and I was able to focus on vlogging, it would give me easily double the amount of time to handle things. I don't have that at all. I have to work my normal job. I have to deal with being offline for days at a time. I have to deal with all the technology and all the travel logistics and do it all alone. This is going to be very challenging from that perspective. There's a lot of people here as we get ready to travel. You can hear them all laughing in the background. We have friends who just came in today from Canada, so I'm also putting in a little bit of time this evening and tomorrow hanging out with them. And we have a concert at our house tomorrow night, so we are really, really busy as I lead up towards taking this trip. I'm starting to lose my mind, but I'm very excited about the trip as well. All right, I'm going to be doing a lot of small questions today on the show because I need to wrap some of these up. I'm going to be traveling and doing questions on the show. It's going to be just a little bit challenging, so I wanted to get some of these done before I go. So, first one up is, had a question. Have you ever been to the Oriental market in Managua? If you have, I must have missed that episode in your catalog. I watch a few Nicaraguan vloggers, and they always say mucho peligros, meaning it's very dangerous. Also, if you're planning on visiting the Caribbean coast. So, let's start with the Mercado Oriental Managua. No, I've not been there for a lot of reasons. One is when you actually live in Nicaragua, going to all of the markets is not nearly as interesting as it sounds like. As a cultural thing, being able to go to a Latin American real market and seeing how people shop when they're incredibly poor and skirting the edges of normal retail, it's interesting. And people do it as like a tourist attraction. In Nicaragua, people go to places like Mercado Oriental because they're really trying to get the absolute best deal on things that may have fallen off the back of a bus or the back of a truck, or just whatever. If you're buying appliances there, you're not going to get warranties, for example. Like, it's a very different thing. So if you're looking for some plastic goods or some artisan products, things like that can be really good. The markets are huge. They're very difficult to navigate. You actually end up hiring guides to go in them. They're not dangerous in a dangerous perspective. No one's going to shiv you while you're in the Oriental market. If they did that, the market system wouldn't work. No one would shop there. You are likely to be pickpocketed, however. You may be led astray. You're probably going to pay really high prices. As a gringo, or anyone who looks like a gringo, which I certainly do, going to someplace like Mercado Oriental is not very beneficial. I'm not going to get those amazing prices. I'm not going to know my way around. People who use the market use it all the time. So just visiting it isn't super practical. The reason that people bring it up, Mercado Oriental is one of the largest, if not the largest traditional market in Central America, but it's also really rough. In no way is it meant for tourists, and I wouldn't recommend going there under normal circumstances. And I don't mean that like, oh, I wouldn't recommend going there, that's scary. I just mean it's not as interesting or practical as you would imagine it is it's just a large market like you go to everywhere else. I've been to the markets in Masaya, I've been to the markets in León, I've been to other markets in Managua, I have been to the markets in Guatemala. A market is more or less a market. If you've never been to one, certainly go to a real one, not a tourist trap one like the Artisans Market in Masaya, which is not the market. That is just a tourist location. And it's fun. Go do that if you want to, absolutely. But the real market in Masaya is what we go to when we say we're going to the market in Masaya. And that's going to take doing that once or twice will take all of the interest out of doing something like that. I have filmed the market here in León just a little bit. I have filmed the one in Masaya just a little bit. I have done a tiny of the filming in some of the Managuan markets, but I don't go to them very often. So it's just one of those things that it's incredibly touristy to go to those markets and walk around, but there's very little practical upside to it. You're not going to really want to go shopping in them under normal circumstances. That said, we do have staff who go shopping at those markets, but we always send staff to do it, and they're hiring a guide, and it's a really big deal, and they have to spend a whole day doing it, and it's a major ordeal. At some point, I certainly am happy to go to the markets and film it, because it is interesting, especially Oriental, which is so big and so, kind of the seedy underbelly of Managua. However, everyone is always more concerned than anywhere else in the country going there with a camera, which I don't think is a really big deal. It's very hard to grab something and run through the market, but then again, it is very easy to disappear into the market. So there are risks. I have to take more precautions, be a little bit more careful, but it is, you don't have to worry about your safety. That's a really silly thing. But I do know people who've had things stolen out of their car and their pockets picked and so forth. And of course, the real risk that you're simply not going to get the good deal that you hope you would get. The other question is, do I plan on going out to the Caribbean coast? Absolutely. Of course I'm going out to the Caribbean coast. I just don't know when. Right now I've got this trip to Bolivia coming up, and it has been an incredibly busy few months. But I'm hoping that December and January and February are a lot slower. In March, I have to be in Mexico. So in that interim, I do have some talks of going out to Laguna de Perla, the Pearl Lagoon, which is just north of Bluefields, and checking out the highway. I want to record that for Drive Warp. I want to show that on this show. There's a lot of stuff I do want to film out there, and it is just a nice drive to go out. So if I can get a little bit of spare time and coordinate with that with my friends who have a car that wants to drive out there with me, then hopefully we will run out there and get a little bit of Caribbean coast content. There really isn't very much on the Caribbean coast, so there's not like you're going to get a ton of content. There's the Corn Islands, which are their own thing. There's Bluefields and its immediate area, and then there's Puerto Cabeza in the north. Beyond that, mostly it's a very empty area, and there's not a lot of roads, so there isn't a ton to film actually on the Caribbean coast. It always feels like there's a huge Caribbean coast in Nicaragua. There must be a million things to see, and there kind of isn't, but showing what is there would be very interesting, so I hope to get out there. All right, our next question. It's hard for me to read. I know I'm late here, but I've been wanting to know for a while, if you really see scorpions in your house? I saw that in one video, sadly they were killing it, of an Australian couple. Also, do you get attacked by alligators in Nicaragua? So, yes, we are in a scorpion zone. This is important to keep in a reasonable context, right? Do we have scorpions? Yes, we're a hot part of the world. Do they come into your house? Yes, from time to time. Have I seen one in my house? In 2015, I went to a hotel in San Juan del Sur that no one had used for a while, and there was a half-dead scorpion in one of the rooms that we were in. So that one, it's like a house, it's a hotel. And I killed one just outside my house, and I believe we killed one inside our house, in the side that was wide open, not in the side where we lived. So I think 3 in 8 years here. I've seen one in Italy. Like, I don't see very many very often. So do they exist? Absolutely. Do you need to be worried about them? Yes, they can be aggressive, and I do know people who've been hospitalized here because of scorpion stings. Are they as dangerous as they are in the U.S.? No. U.S. scorpions are generally more dangerous than Nicaraguan scorpions. All people risk being allergic to scorpions, and you need to be aware that they can be dangerous. They're not very dangerous, right? But they're far more dangerous than, say, a spider. You have spiders in your house, you don't need to kill them. They are not going to pose a threat to you under normal circumstances, even under very rare circumstances. Scorpions, however, under very normal circumstances, can pose a potential threat. And for my family, for example, where it runs in the family to have anaphylactic shock caused by scorpions, they can be life-threatening. So be aware, most people, when they say, yeah, I killed a scorpion in my house, you need to kill scorpions in your house normally. They are not an annoyance. They are not it's not like spiders. It's not like a lot of things. They are actually an aggressive predator of humans. They're not going to eat you, but they will intentionally go into spaces where you are. They will go into your shoes, they will go into your towels, they will go into your bedding. Don't push your beds against the wall. Standard precautions you take anywhere in the warm world, certainly things you would have to do in the US as well. Do those things here. And generally, you're in very good shape. As far as staying away from them, we really don't have an abundance of scorpions. They're quite rare, and they're easy to avoid with just general precautions. It's one of the reasons that we keep our houses very clean. It discourages scorpions from wanting to bother entering in the first place. But if you do see them, unfortunately, you do need to take precautions against them. It would be reckless to allow scorpions to stay anywhere near your house, because they will gravitate towards places where you will also want to be. We check our shoes all the time, even though we've never found scorpions in them. You do not want to be surprised by a scorpion and get bitten, especially if you have children or the elderly or anyone is sick or anyone with a history of anaphylactic shock in their family. Having an allergic reaction to scorpions can be extremely dangerous. My wife's aunt has had a scorpion sting. She was hospitalized, and they told her they can't save her the next time. She has to move to places with no scorpions. That's how dramatic it is. So don't take scorpions as lightly as it seems like maybe you should. If you're used to, you know, other types of critters around your house that you're like, mice, don't kill them, take them. So yeah, I will carry mice from my house into a field somewhere and let them go. I will carry snakes from my house into a field. Every day my kids come and say, there's a spider in my room, and I put him in my hand and I carry him outside. I'm good with all those things. I will let them live. I will go through a lot of effort to let them live. Scorpions need to die. It is for everyone's safety, unfortunately. So yes, alligators. No, we don't have alligators here. We do have crocodiles. That said, we do have crocodiles. We have them on the beaches, we have them in the rivers, we have them in the lake, at least in the big one. However, I have never heard of anyone being attacked by a crocodile. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I've never heard of it. It's not something that people are scared of. I mean, you're scared when you're in a boat. Don't put your hand in the water. There's crocodiles. But you don't have the same kind of fear you do in, like, Florida, where you're going to be, like, casually walk around and, oh, my gosh, an alligator and my dog's gone. Never heard of anything like that. They are not in spots where they're overlapping with people. Nicaragua does a much better job of keeping the wildlife separate from the people, whereas in, like, Florida, there's so many people that everywhere there should be wildlife, there's also people. So the alligators have nowhere to go, so they live in your backyard. It's not like that here. It's basically you're getting into water that you can tell is mangroves or whatever, and there could be crocodiles in it. Also, it's important to note we have a lot of caimans. Caimans are like the little baby of the crocodile alligator family. They are much smaller than crocodiles and are very rarely dangerous to the point where you'd be worried about being killed. Of course, being nipped by one will hurt like crazy. You'll be screaming, ouch, that smarts, all evening. However, they generally can't kill you, and they are a lot more skittish. So caimans are much more popular here. A lot of people call those crocodiles. So while there's a lot of them, and people will be like, crocodiles, and then you find out it's a little caiman and it's like this big. And yes, stay away from it. Don't put your fingers in its mouth, but you don't have to be afraid of it the way you would with an actual crocodile. So yeah, we have crocs, not a big risk. And I've never heard of anyone needing to do anything because there were crocodiles, except for don't put your hands in the water when taking wilderness boat tours. So yes, they exist, but it's important to temper it's not a thing you actually have to worry about or think about. I can go 6 months at a time and never once think, oh, there's crocodiles somewhere in this country. All right, here's a big one. I'm going to do my best with this. Can you please compare Costa Rica, Panama, and Mexico to Nicaragua in how the advantages are in property prices, weather, number of hurricanes, prices of land? I think that's related to property value. Anyway, okay, so let's compare this region a little bit. So first of all, I've never lived in two of these countries, but I have lived in two others. I've lived in Panama and here in Nicaragua. Costa Rica lies between Nicaragua and Panama, and Mexico is a few countries away to the north. Just to give you a little bit of context, you can look at a map and see where they are on your own. Of these, Nicaragua by far sits at the low end of the income spectrum. Mexico sits in the middle. Costa Rica and Panama are outrageously rich. So these are very different countries from an income perspective as a starting point. Panama has the lowest population of the zone, followed by Costa Rica. Nicaragua is quite a bit larger, and then Mexico is an order of magnitude bigger in everything, right? Like instead of 3 million, 5 million, 7 million, 150 million or whatever, like the numbers are crazy different. Of these, far and away, Nicaragua is going to be your lowest cost for everything. Just in general, it's the lowest cost, but right now, property values are at their record all-time low. So because of that, we are not just low in the general sense, we are very specifically low in this specific moment. So if you're looking for how much you're going to get for land, Nicaragua is going to be far and away the best. If you're wondering what you're going to get for a pre-built structure, Nicaragua is a slam dunk because those are the things that are discounted the most heavily right now. And the most things are on the market. So your opportunity to buy a house that is pre-existing in Nicaragua is going to vastly outstrip your opportunities in any other country. So that's a starting point. There's places available in all of these. Mexico, because of its size and its immense abundance of options, always remains very affordable. Maybe not in Mexico City, maybe not in Cancun, but somewhere. Mexico is big. Like, it's hard to describe just how large Mexico is. So if you're looking for a very expensive lifestyle that runs similar to Costa Rica or Panama, absolutely you can do that there, no problem. But if you also want something really cheap like Nicaragua, absolutely you can also do that, no problem. Maybe you'll never hit quite as cheap as Nicaragua, especially right now. Worth noting, the Mexican peso is currently the #1 strongest currency on the planet, at least of any real fiat currency. So if you're looking to do anything in Mexico, be aware, it doesn't matter where you're coming from. The Mexican peso being so strong means your money isn't going to go as far as it normally would. That doesn't make Mexico expensive, but it has raised the prices there by between 5 and maybe as much as 20%. It has come back down a little bit, so it's not as bad as it was, but it is still quite bad. So if you have a memory of a low ebb in Mexico and you go down now, you may get a little bit of sticker shock, not compared to the US, but you may get sticker shock in general that prices have gone up in comparison when you translate from another currency. That is likely to return to some degree, but the peso is probably going to remain strong for quite some time because a ton of manufacturing is moving into Mexico because it's such a good place for that, while Southeast Asia and East Asia have really been suffering to some degree simply because of oil prices and so forth necessary for shipping. Not going to go into global logistics and its interplay with world currencies, but the Mexican peso being as strong as it is has played a major role in making Mexico less affordable right at the moment. If you already owned, you'd be in great shape. Yes, your food would cost a little bit more, but hey, move to Nicaragua for a year and save that money and then just go back. Whatever, there's lots of options. Okay, so that gives you Mexico. Mexico is dynamic compared to the others. The other three are so small that you can think of any of them as simply being a single city. They are not, but you can think of them that way. All three of them are smaller than, say, Chicago. Nicaragua on its own is roughly the same size as a Philadelphia, Houston, or Dallas. They're all roughly the same size. Chicago is about 2 million people larger than any of those three cities, and none of these other three countries are as big as Chicago. But that's important to give kind of that, like, Chicagoland is bigger than Nicaragua by 2 million people. That's pretty crazy. Costa Rica is about 2 million people smaller than Nicaragua at 5 million. And then Panama is a little bit smaller than that, even though it has just, I believe, a tiny bit more land. It doesn't look like it on a map, but it does. So Costa Rica is land the smallest. Nicaragua is land the largest, except for everything in Mexico is the biggest by far. So when you're looking at these three Central American countries, you really can think of them as being much like a single city, because like all of Panama has the population of St. Louis, for example. So when we say, what does it cost there? Sure, there are expensive areas and cheap areas, just like there are around St. Louis. But you can think of St. Louis as a general cost of living location, because going to the grocery store in one neighborhood or another is not going to vary that dramatically. Same thing that you're going to find in Panama or Costa Rica, where no matter where you are in the country, there's going to be similarities. And here in Nicaragua as well. But in Mexico, you're not going to have that. As you move between different parts of Mexico, you're going to find wild disparities in cost of living and wild disparities in weather. Panama is always warm, like Nicaragua. Neither of us have high enough altitudes to have major population centers that aren't at essentially sea level weather. And we are both more or less super close to the equator, so we are very much just warm year round. It's very straightforward. We share nearly identical weather. But a really important thing that's different, and this was asked as a question, which countries get hurricanes? So before we say this, it's important to understand getting a hurricane is on its own a very meaningless gauge. You can take let's take the United States. The United States could get major tropical storm after tropical storm heading up, not tropical storm, but Pacific storm heading up and hitting Alaska over and over and over again. But Alaska is a giant area. If it doesn't hit an area that has population, what does it affect? If someone said, I want to move to Florida, and someone said, oh, well, I'm using terrible examples. Someone wants to move to Nebraska, and they say, America gets hurricanes all the time. You'd say, they do. They also get these terrible storms in Alaska. I'm so scared of living in Nebraska? No, it's really far away. It has nothing to do with those storms. Those areas get storms. Those areas might be things you have to worry about, but not in Nebraska. Nicaragua is similar. We get hurricanes on a regular basis, but they hit our nearly unpopulated, and we mentioned this earlier, Caribbean coast. They don't hit our Pacific coast. So we're a pretty big country. So when a hurricane comes over the country, it has to come up over the Caribbean coast, cross the jungle, go up over the mountain range, and then hit the populated part of the country on the west side of the mountains. Well, by the time it does that, it typically is just a lot of rain. So if the question is the technicality, does Nicaragua get a lot of hurricanes? Yeah, it gets a fair number. Does this have an impact to you as a person who's considering moving to Nicaragua? No, it does not. Not under normal circumstances. If you want to live in a Caribbean island that Nicaragua happens to own, yes, then you have to worry about hurricanes in a different way. All Caribbean islands do because they're islands, and even if it's rare, it's a disaster. So you have to worry about those things. Panama is lucky. It has never taken a hurricane. However, they said the same thing about Galveston. Galveston was impervious to hurricanes. People built up there. They invested there like crazy. And famously, around 1909, the Hurricane Isaac storm came through and destroyed the city of Galveston to a point where it has not rebuilt today, more than a century later. And it was the trigger for the creation of the massive city of Houston today, where it was inland enough to kind of protect it from storms. And now all the people who live in between Galveston and Houston, which is the majority of the Houston suburbs, are sorry because they're constantly underwater. Now the hurricanes that they never can get, that they're impervious to, are an annual event that completely destroy the area, make it nearly impossible to live. So you have to gauge these things carefully. Does Panama historically take hurricanes? No. Could it? Absolutely. It's in the hurricane belt. It would only take one tiny little weather change and hurricanes go in a slightly different direction, and suddenly Panama's getting hit all the time. However, Panama is a tiny strip of land, so anything like a hurricane hitting it would be much more devastating than here in Nicaragua. Here in Nicaragua, we have the ability to get to the mountains or to higher ground and have the entire population in those areas, and there are no large population centers on the water. So the fear of a hurricane isn't that high. The biggest risk is actually mudslides in the mountains, which is the same thing for Guatemala, not flooding in the coastal regions. Whereas in Panama City and most of their major population centers sit directly on the water. So if there was a hurricane to hit Panama, it could hit the canal zone directly and do massive damage, not just to infrastructure, but to people. So while there are 0 known hurricanes in Panama, you also have to look at the overall risk, and I believe Panama has a much higher overall risk to hurricane and tropical storms than Nicaragua does, even though Nicaragua is in a relatively commonly takes hurricanes scenario. It's a very strange bit of risk analysis to have to look at that, but I come from a Wall Street risk analysis background, right? And this is how you have to look at risk. You have to look at the big picture of what actually causes damage and not just what things that, does it take a hurricane? That's not what we really care about. Of course, Mexico, being as large as it is, takes a lot of hurricanes at all kinds of different times. Acapulco famously just got one a few days ago, and it has been an absolute disaster. But that's because they don't take them very often, and they were not prepared. Because of the size of the country, there's always a storm going on somewhere in Mexico. But in general, Mexico is relatively not that bad when it comes to those storms. Same thing with Costa Rica. It sits between Nicaragua and Panama. It doesn't get a lot of major storms, but it does get them. Again, most of their population doesn't sit on the Atlantic coast, and that's the only place that would be at really great risk. So it's not a huge deal there, but be aware, because unlike Nicaragua, Costa Rica does have a population on the Atlantic coast. So could it be an issue? Yes, it's much more likely to be an issue than in Nicaragua, but it's still not likely. In none of these countries are you specifically really worried about hurricanes. That's probably the important takeaway. This is a very safe area for all those things, and of all of them, only Mexico has a really big ongoing seismic risk, mostly because of its giant cities and the way that much of the country is built on very shaky ground. Here in Nicaragua, we are at huge risk to earthquakes, but everything since 1972 has been built with that in mind, and And so while we get earthquakes on nearly a daily basis, we pretty much don't care. And it really is all the time. I will be laying in bed and feel the bed shaking, and no one says anything, no one wakes up, no alarms go off, no one cares, because it doesn't affect a thing, right? It doesn't cause things to rattle, it doesn't knock things off the walls. Everything is built so solidly, everything is built with earthquakes happening daily that if earthquakes were going to cause a problem, the structure wouldn't be there. Structures that have been here for 50 to 100, maybe 300 years, and all these earthquakes they've been through haven't caused a problem, they're not going to cause a problem now, right? So in general, volcanoes and earthquakes and hurricanes, these are not things you generally have to worry about in the region. In Mexico, I would say you have to be more cognizant of hurricanes. It is the only region where there's places you may actually be considering living in some reasonable way where hurricanes can happen and where demonstrably hurricane preparedness may be lacking. That's really the combination that you would be worried about. The much bigger risk, if you were worried about some form of natural disaster that would actually be life-threatening in this region, it is tsunami. That's what you really want to be worried about. So if you're living on a coastal region, which a lot of, especially expats, do throughout this zone, it is possible and historically true that we can get tsunamis. The protections for that are way better now than they were in 1992 when the last one hit, but they do hit, and it is something that you should be cognizant of. No one that I've ever heard of, outside of the 1972 quake in Managua, for which things are completely prepared today, other than that, I've never heard a scenario where expats have had to worry about significant widespread damage from hurricanes, tropical storms, earthquakes, anything like that. Tsunamis are the one exception, and it's been quite a while. They're not every day, right? They're not even, it's like once a century, but once a century is an awful lot for a disaster of that size if you live in a coastal area. So you need to be aware of that one thing. And we did an episode on that recently, so I won't go further into that. Go look up. It's like 2 weeks ago, and it clearly says tsunami, and it shows people running from a tidal wave in the thumbnail. So if you have more interest in that, certainly go look at that. When it comes to the more general question of weather, which is what really actually matters, it's hurricanes are going to be one of those. You know, I lived here for 3 years and there was a hurricane that affected us, and that was an interesting 48-hour experience, right? That's generally how hurricanes will affect you, even if you end up in one anywhere in this region. Generally not Acapulco in this particular case. But beyond that, weather is what affects you day to day. So it's worth noting, for the majority, nearly all people in Panama and Nicaragua are completely tropical in the places where you're realistically going to be living, either on the coast or in the major cities. That means it is very hot year-round. You're looking at 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Daylight. So you just have half a day is bright, half a day is dark. It is always warm. There is a rainy season and a dry season, and it's basically the same temperature every day, same length of day every day, which is all things that are very foreign and exotic to North Americans who are used to big shifts in seasonal weather patterns, in daylight and night patterns and things like that. Costa Rica sits directly in between the two, and you would think would simply mimic the two countries on either side of it, but it does not. It is very different. Costa Rica by far has the majority of its population living pretty high in the mountains. Not super high, so you're not like looking at snow, you're not looking at a dramatic shift, but what you do have is most of the people, especially in San Jose, living at a very high altitude that allows for quite mild weather. So even though Costa Rica on the coast is very warm and will be exactly the same as Panama and Nicaragua, up in the mountains where most people live, it is quite a bit more mild, an easy, I would say, 10-degree drop compared to the coast, and that's just enough to make the city incredibly pleasant. The difference between the amount that you want to just get out and walk around in San Jose compared to Managua is dramatic, based completely on the weather, but because there's so many more people outside walking around, more things are built for people outside walking around. Not that people don't get outside Managua, of course people are outside all the time, but you're willing to walk really long distances in San Jose because the weather's fantastic, especially when the sun goes low in the sky. It gets cool enough that walking across the city to go to dinner is no problem at all. So that is a big advantage if you're looking at metropolitan Costa Rica. But if you're looking at coastal Costa Rica, which is what an awful lot of expats are looking at, you might as well be identical to Nicaragua and Panama. You're not going to have any noticeable change because it's just one continuous coast over a very short distance. Mexico is where things get very different. Because it's so far north, its coasts are generally but only generally, cooler than here in Central America. So most of Mexico is going to give you a little bit of a drop, even on the coast, but never quite as cool as, say, California. So it's always a little bit warmer. If you're over on the Yucatan, be aware some areas like Merida are incredibly hot. Just the weather patterns in that area make Cancun and that zone warmer than you would anticipate for the region. And so they're matching the temperatures of Panama and Nicaragua. But as you go into the interior of Mexico, where vastly more people live, I mean, outrageous percentages of Mexicans live in the Central Highlands, which run from the Guatemalan border all the way north. Like, you really do have this huge region of higher altitude, and they get really high altitude to the point where they get extremely mild temperatures. When you're looking at places like Puebla or Mexico City or the traditional Mexican states north of Mexican City, all of that region, the weather is amazing, and you can live incredibly mild. Some of the best weather in North America can be found in that central Mexican region. So there you get an experience totally different than anywhere in the other countries that you've asked about. Now, you did not ask in the question that was written about Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. They more mimic Mexico than they do the southern three countries. That more people talk about the southern three, the hot three, but the cooler three Central American countries, the triangle to the north, the Central American Triangle, and the northern part of the CA4, they have milder weather compared to the southern ones. And as you get up to Guatemala, it becomes very mild. So Guatemala has almost its entire population at altitude living in some of the mildest weather around, and the majority of Mexico mimics that. So anywhere that you're looking at a coast, you're basically getting some risk of hurricanes or some kind of storm, but generally pretty minimal, Mexico being the exception. And you're looking at warm temperatures that will vary a little, but not dramatically. If you are then looking at the interior, Panama and Nicaragua remain very hot in their interiors. Costa Rica becomes a little bit more mild, and Mexico becomes very, very mild in its interior. So I hope that answers your questions. Thanks for joining me. I'm excited that this is the last of the full videos being made as we go. Tomorrow I'll be making the video as I pack and get ready and try to get out the door, so I'll be wrapping that one up early. I've actually recorded the 11th and 12th already, and they're already posted and ready for you guys. So you're all set, guaranteed over the next several days you're going to have videos. I am getting ready to get out the door. And please like and subscribe. Take a moment to share these videos on social media. Tell your friends about the show. Let someone, just tell a friend, tell somebody about the show. Get them, be like, please go subscribe, join up, become part of this cool community. I bet you're going to learn something really interesting about Nicaragua, Central America, possibly South America. I mean, normally we talk about how this is such a Nicaraguan show, but I'm getting ready to head to South America. We're going to have absolutely, totally different content for you over the next week. So I'm excited about that. Subscribe, get ready, because Bolivia, how cool is that? But it's going to be like 4 or 5 days before you see those episodes. We got lots of cool Nicaragua stuff between now and then. Be sure to buy me a coffee if you want to support the channel. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/ScottAlanMiller. That's like Patreon, comes directly to me and helps make all of this possible with our adventures and our trips and our cameras and all the things that are needed to make the show. And I will see all of you tomorrow.